Welcome, everyone. As Ben said, I'm Debbie Chiswer, the Director of Chicago Careers in Law. And quickly, Chicago Careers in Law is designed to help you explore your interest in law through programs like this, internships, and advising. And then if you decide to pursue law school, we will support you through the application process. You each received a flash drive. On it are some important documents that will help you begin the process of exploring, including my contact information and links to the pre-law listserv. One of the things benefits you'll get by signing up for the pre-law listserv is notice of upcoming events and opportunities. So February 1st, mark your calendars, is our first career exploration program where we'll be bringing 3 intellectual property lawyers to the college to talk about their work and how that might appeal to you. I also want to take a minute to thank Abby and Ben for their hard work in pulling together the panel. In order to get these great speakers, it involved a lot of research and phone calls, so thank you very much for your help. And I want to thank Dennis Hutchinson for moderating the panel. And I wanted to make one last announcement. If you are a 3rd year or 4th year who are here, you are eligible for a raffle for a discount provided by Test Masters. We don't endorse any particular company, but when companies do come to us with discounts, we like to pass them on. So we are going to be giving away 5 discount vouchers, and I will make that announcement at the end of the program. Dennis, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and welcome. The panel is indeed diverse. We have folks who practice law in both the public sector and in the private sector. What we're going to do this morning is have each one of them speak for a couple of minutes and then throw the floor open to questions, because this really gives you an opportunity to ask the sort of questions of people who are in the field, who are in your position within the last several years, to get some sort of insight into how to think about the decision of whether to apply to law school and what it means to have a legal career. So, starting on my far left, David Roth, the class of '86, works for the state of Illinois. Next to him is Neil Kawashishima. I can't say it that early in the morning on a cold day. The class of '93, who's in private practice and is also a member of the visiting committee of the college. Next to him is Melanie Sloan, who has essentially her own non-governmental organization. And to my immediate left is Diane Kelleher, also the class of '93, like Neil, who works for the United States. So let's start with David, and the question is, where did you think you were going to be professionally when you were 20 years old, like people sitting in the audience? And how did you get to where you are now?
Okay, when I was in college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was definitely considering law, and I took quite a variety of classes. I had a political science major. One of the classes, by the way, that I took, there was a program called, I believe, the Pearl program, Politics, Economics, Rhetoric, and Law. And I took a class on the Constitution and race. And anyway, I decided to apply for law school, and I took off a year, and after graduating from law school, I didn't really want to go into a private firm. I wasn't particularly interested in trying to get clients. I didn't think that would be right for me, and I was interested in public service. So I kind of, after clerking for a year for the Illinois Appellate Court, I kind of stumbled upon my current job in the state government and discrimination law. It's kind of a coincidence, maybe, or maybe not, that I ended up working in discrimination law after taking class with Professor Hutchinson in discrimination. And so it's great to be back with Professor Hutchinson. But
thank you, David. Neil?
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. I think the short answer to the question is what did I want to do or think would be doing at age 20 is not what I'm doing now. And what I thought, I knew I wanted to go to law school. I knew I wanted to practice as a lawyer, but I thought that eventually I would be working with the government like Diane is doing, or perhaps going back to school, graduate school, and teaching. I did not think that I would be in private practice, as I have been since graduating law school. And so that just goes to show that things happen along your career. You can't foresee them or control them, but they tend to work out for the best. And I'm thrilled to be practicing law now. I enjoy it. I have a terrific practice, and I find it to be very interesting. And I look forward to your questions throughout the morning.
Very good. Thank you. Melanie?
I was deciding between going to graduate school in English and going to law school, and I actually applied to both. And then I got letters back from some of the graduate schools saying, well, it's terrific if you just want a PhD in English for its own sake, but don't really expect to get a job teaching English. And that was pretty much, that put a damper on my ideas about going to graduate school in English. And I also I wanted a little more control over my life. I didn't want to end up in North Dakota because that was the only place with an assistant professorship available. Plus, I also thought that there were a lot of opportunities to do great work in law. I was always interested in public service, and I thought that law offered perhaps more opportunities for public service really than English literature. So I went to law school, but I could never have foreseen what I'm doing now then. And that's, I think, one of the key things that I agree with Neil. I think whatever you think you're going to be doing is probably not what you're going to be doing. You'll just find that one job may lead to another job. But I also, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a lawyer at a law firm who said, never take one job for the next. Don't think you're positioning yourself by taking one job so that you will get that next job, because you just don't know what's going to happen in the interim, that if that next job is really the job you're even going to want after all. So I think you have to be, you obviously want to go and get a job in law that you think is interesting and a good fit for you, but understand that there are going to be other opportunities that will come up, and you should explore all your options.
Great. Diane?
I actually probably am where I thought I was going to be when I was 20. I knew I wanted to go to law school. I did high school debate. I took all of Hutch's classes. I was like, I never even considered anything else. So for me, I applied to law school. I applied, like as early as I could, December, as soon as I took the LSATs. But I did think, though, that I wanted to be like a prosecutor and do criminal law. So I do civil litigation, defensive work, and so it was a little bit of a difference for me when I went to law school. I didn't actually find the criminal stuff as interesting as I thought I would. And I knew when I graduated that I had a lot of debt, and I would probably be at a firm, and I sort of planned 2 to 4 years, and ended up 3, and then I knew I wanted to be in the government doing public service, but also, frankly, when you litigate for the government, or against the government, as Melanie does, the issues are very interesting, and fundamentally, I think just more challenging and intellectual than the issues that come up in private litigation between private clients. So I think, except for the change from criminal to civil, this is about where I thought I would be.
Let me ask one more quick question before we throw the floor open to questions of each of the panelists. What's been your most satisfying professional experience in the last year?
I suppose I was discussing earlier with someone. I had a really interesting case last year. Involves both discrimination law and constitutional law, and that was a situation where somebody was looking for a house. They were considering purchasing it, and when they went to visit it, it was a complex of townhomes, and one of the people in the neighboring townhomes, they hung up a Confederate flag and allegedly used a racial slur toward the person the person buying the property. I've really enjoyed working on that case because it involves both the constitutional aspects of free speech, whether somebody on their own private property can put up a Confederate flag and use derogatory racial terms, and also discrimination. What are the rights of a person not being interfered with when they try to purchase property. So that balancing and analysis of facts and law has been very interesting and challenging for me.
I would say, and this is not at all sexy, but so you have to think about it a little bit. So we were engaged by a new client, a family that owns a business or a series of businesses valued at in excess of $500 million. And they had virtually no planning. Their company structure were a mess, their personal holdings were a mess, and we came in and over the course of the last 18 months have begun to right the ship, put things in order. And so when you think about it, what does that mean? It means, well, we helped a wealthy family remain wealthy or very wealthy. We save them taxes, we help protect them from liability, we help put together trusts for their generation, the later generation, so they don't have to work, and so forth. And that sounds pretty cynical, but when you think about it, what we did is we also enabled them to take care of their employees in a better way. We allowed them to perpetuate this wonderful business that they have through the generations without having to sell upon death because of the death tax. So we enabled part of American industry or commerce to continue. And that is not as sort of inherently satisfying as helping a widow keep her farm, but the repercussions of what we did will be helpful to their small community and as well as to their family.
So the coolest thing about my job is that I get to look in the paper every morning and read it and see other people read it and see, wow, that's awful. And I read it and say, wow, that's awful. What can I do about that today?
Get the microphone closer.
We have rewarding moments pretty frequently based on that. I would say one of our most rewarding moments over the last year was we forced the Department of Justice to release the transcript of former Vice President Dick Cheney's interview with the FBI in the Valerie Plame Wilson case when Justice didn't want to because Justice thought, this is no reflection on Diane, this wasn't her case, when Justice was arguing that they shouldn't have to release this because this is the kind of material that could be used as fodder on The Daily Show, which we now refer to the Justice Department's Daily Show defense. Luckily for us, the judge didn't buy that, and that was pretty rewarding.
I actually this past year got to do my first jury trial where I was the lead attorney, so there were 3 of us. But I picked the jury, and I did the opening and the closing, and then the direct and cross-examinations of some of the witnesses we split up. And we argued the jury instructions to the judge. We had motions in limine, which are basically arguments to the judge about what evidence should and should not be heard in the case. And it was my first time dealing with a jury. I've done bench trials before, where the judge is the person to whom you make the arguments and who makes the decision. And it was just incredibly different. Although unsuccessful, we did lose the case. And part of what was interesting is the judge allowed us to talk to the jurors after the verdict came back. It's sort of, if the jurors feel like it, you can do it. And if they don't, then generally they just go home. But it was really interesting to hear just their reactions to, things that pieces of evidence that you think should sort of strike people one way, and they had just had completely different views. And also just how little the judge's instructions mattered to them. I do a lot of legal argument on motions, and the jury instructions, I thought, oh, well, they'll just decide the case on the instructions. But no, they, definitely had their own views about witnesses and what was fair. And that was ultimately what really mattered to them. And so it was a great experience, not successful for our client, unfortunately, but a great professional experience for me, and I really liked trying to sort of tailor our arguments to the jurors rather than to a federal judge.
Terrific. All right, the floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. What can this panel tell you about what to do or what not to do as you plan the next several years of your life? Yes, ma'am.
And we can just sort of go across the panel. What was your most satisfying temporary experience? Either an internship or a one-year clerkship. But what did you do just real briefly that really had an impact on you, either personally or professionally?
To keep it brief, as I mentioned, I clerked for a year for an Illinois appellate judge. I dealt with appellate decisions in civil and criminal law. He was a really great judge to work for, Justice Scariano. He had a lot of character, and I guess if I were to keep it brief, I guess the one thing he taught me, he said, if your mother believes she loves you, check it out. And in law, you have to check out everything. Don't trust anybody. Check everything out.
I would say the one experience that, for me, was, in hindsight, just a wild ride and a lot of fun, though at the time was absolutely miserable, was a few years ago, I was working on the Pritzker case, and for those of you who don't know, that was a case in which our client, Liesl Pritzker, who was an actress, sued essentially her father and some other people for breach of trust. And it was a very, very big lawsuit in excess of $1 billion. And basically, during the time was miserable because the most activity took place between Thanksgiving and New Year's one year, and so a few of us lived in a conference room essentially for the holidays. But why was it exciting in that? Because you build this sort of team mentality, like being in the trenches with your colleagues. It was an interesting case, wild twists and turns. There was a lot of, it was a high-profile case, so it was like being part of a soap opera or something like that. And we served our client well. And now I wouldn't want to do that every day or have my practice be comprised of that kind of fight, but once in a while you have something like that where, although tiring, in hindsight it made you a better lawyer, made you realize what's important in life, and it really isn't money, and help you grow closer with your colleagues. So I would say that.
In 1994, I worked for the House of Representatives for the Democrats, and that was the year of the Republican takeover, and so suddenly I lost my job. Thousands of staffers lost their jobs, and that was pretty stunning for me, and suddenly I was on unemployment for the first time. They actually had people come into the House office buildings and teach you how to register for unemployment. And then I went to work for a very small union-side labor firm because I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go back to the practice of law, and I had not enjoyed big firm practice. I had done it for a year, and I thought it really wasn't for me. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to, for a client I'm going to really like. I'm going to be working for unions, and this is going to be great. So then I get there, and I discover that what we're doing now for this union-side labor firm is taking away pension benefits from union members because the unions can no longer afford them. And so I think it was an important lesson for me is that everything is not the way you think it's going to be. If people are interested in labor law, by the way, there's a great book by a man named Thomas Gagan called Which Side Are You On? And it talks about all the complexities there are in dealing with the labor world and why it's never black and white. And I think that was a terrific lesson for me, how so not black and white, even something that I thought I was going to be working for the good guys, and it was really hard to be comfortable with that in the end.
Tom Gagan is a labor lawyer in Chicago, as a matter of fact, still.
I did a judicial clerkship also after law school. I clerked for a federal trial court judge in Boston, and I think that was the best sort of temporary job I had. It's sort of invaluable if you want to be a litigator later because you get to sort of see how a courtroom works, what is important. It's obviously judges are different, but there's sort of some things that are important to all judges, and what argument styles from the attorneys work well and some that don't work so well. So I really thought that was a great job, and in some ways it was tough to go from that to working at a law firm just because then I was sort of in a room looking at documents and mostly doing that kind of thing. But that was a great, and they tend to be like a year, sometimes 2 years, but they're definitely temporary, but they're great opportunities to see the courtroom.
May I just add one thing, kind of echoing what Melanie was saying, that years ago, due to budget cutbacks with the state, I was temporarily laid off, and I did some post-conviction work in a death row inmate case, and so every setback in your career is a potential benefit, and if you make good use of it. So I just want to echo that part of what she was saying.
Good point. There's a question over here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what's your thought process when you're selecting law schools, and what do you recommend that people now?
I have one answer to that. I was always quite liberal, but I thought it would, and University of Chicago was not known to be a liberal law school, and that's where I went to school. And I think it is a good thing to go to a place where everybody is not going to be just like you and is not like-minded, because you will never learn better how to shape your arguments than if you have to argue against really...
Excellent advice.
I would
The best argument against the Yale Law School that I've heard.
I would suggest to anyone who's thinking about going to law school to, one, rethink that, meaning, do you really want to go to law school? What do you want to do? Do you really want to practice? I've never been a believer that if you go to law school, I think you should ultimately want to practice. And as to Melanie's earlier point, you go to law school not so that you could be a senator one day, but so that you can be a lawyer. And I'm a purist in that regard. So that's number one. Do you really want to practice law? Do you think you have an interest in that? And number two, law school is terribly expensive. So unless you have a trust fund, or unless you're fortunate enough to have scholarship money, you're going to, like I did, have to take out loans, a lot of loans. And then, so the second question is, if you're going to do this and you're going to take on this kind of debt, how are you going to pay it back? And those are practical questions that you have to ask yourself. And if the answer is yes, I want to go to law school, and yes, I'm willing to take up this debt, and yes, I have a plan, some way to pay it back, then I think go with God and good luck. I think that's great.
One of the things you have to keep in mind is that given the structure of American legal education, you will learn as much or more from your fellow classmates than you will from the academic faculty, just given student-faculty ratios and the cultural norms that exist in American law schools. Study groups, fellow students, are where the real learning actually happens. And that's an argument for going to the best place you can get into, where there are the best students. And that's something to keep sharply in mind. The false cognate is, well, I think I want to be an environmental lawyer, so University of Vermont has the best program, that's where I'm going to go. As everyone on the panel has essentially said, that's the wrong way to look at planning a legal career. Point number one is, do I want to be a lawyer? Point number two is, where can I get the best general education that I can?
Yeah, I will say I did interviewing this year for the DOJ Honors Program, which is the way that the Department of Justice hires people right out of law school or who have had judicial clerkships or fellowships. And I gotta say, like, a lot of people come in with sort of these concentrations, sometimes in human rights or environmental stuff or even tax. And I don't think it actually plays much of a role in terms of whether or not they get hired. It's mostly, where did they go to school, how well did they do, what did they do with their summers. So I think you can always get jobs that will give you that experience, but I don't think you should pick a school based on the concentration. I agree. It's more of a trend now in law schools than it was when I went to school, but I don't actually think, at least when I've done interviewing and in the discussions with our hiring committee, I don't think it actually plays much of a role.
Yes, ma'am.
So I know that a lot of people might like law in theory. What are some things that you have kind of faced, or if there are any, that you faced in your careers that maybe you weren't expecting their career to have that sort of aspect, and that maybe would have made you change your mind about your career, or you learn to like it, but some other people, you can see other people maybe not liking that aspect.
Melanie, you mentioned that big firm practice wasn't your cup of tea. Could you explain from a personal standpoint why that was true?
When you are hired by a law firm, they look at where you went to school, just like Diane was saying, the Justice Department hires, and they want really smart people. But then you get there, and particularly if you're in litigation, you are now going to be doing the most mind-numbing work of your entire career for the first couple of years. You're going to be doing document production, which means you're going to get sent to some warehouse in Texas where there are thousands of boxes of documents, and you're going to be going through every single one of them. Maybe nowadays they do it more on computer, but let me just assure you, it is horrible. It's really dull, and there's no such person who thinks document review, that's what I want to do and I love it. It's what you get through, but I couldn't literally sit there for 2 years and do that. So that was really rough for me. I also didn't particularly enjoy we're going to help one big company win a lot of money from another big company, so that we're just going to be changing the money around. One of the law firms I worked at did a lot of insurance defense work, and so it was just, were they going to pay out claim, that Exxon had? And again, it was really just money shifting, and it was hard for me to care about the work. And I really needed something that I could do that would both be more interesting on a day-to-day basis, but also be that I could feel more fulfilled by. Now, the kind of practice I've had, I often deal with really interesting constitutional questions, like the speech or debate clause of the Constitution, which is something that you really never think that you're going to end up doing. Very few lawyers spend time on questions like that, and that's pretty fun. But I would also highly recommend, by the way, the U.S. Attorney's Office, which I think was the best job I've ever had. It's a rare person that I meet who's been at the U.S. Attorney's Office who hasn't loved their time there and thought that they gained so much great experience, whether it's in the civil or the criminal section. I was a criminal lawyer. The jury experience is also interesting, but even the civil lawyers get a lot of experience in trials. And the great thing about working for the government, like Diane said, is that at a much younger age, you have much higher responsibility. You're not just going to be sitting in a conference room or a warehouse looking at documents. You're going to be the person who's in charge of making the decisions. You're going to be the person who's doing the depositions. You're not going to be the person who's prepping the partner for the depositions. So working in the government really gets you fabulous experience that otherwise at private firms you might not get till much later.
Some of you have heard me say this, but I think in this context, especially in light of what Melanie just said, it bears repeating. If you care about civil rights, if you care about the integrity of the criminal justice system, if you care about how the government treats people, be a prosecutor. Work in a U.S. Attorney's office. Work for the state's attorney. They're the ones who have their hands on the reins of what evidence comes into court, who gets prosecuted for what, and the like. Working as a public defender may balm your conscience, but it's an impossible job. And you have so little control over outcomes and results. But if you really care about the integrity of the way the government operates, be a prosecutor. That's worth thinking about. Yes?
This is a really open-ended question, but in your experience, how often do you find yourself, because of the nature of your profession, being pushed to the boundaries and limits of your personal ethics and morals and convictions?
Melanie obviously never does. Neil?
Well, because I'm the only one in private practice, I'm the logical choice to answer this question. Right. I think often. And this is true, I think, particularly in my practice. My practice used to be called wealth management. Now it is called private client. And the joke among the lawyers in my firm, and it's a big law firm, so it's particularly funny coming from lawyers who represent Exxon or large companies, is that wealth management means you don't represent poor people. And to an extent, that is true. And so people who have wealth, and therefore, by definition, have power, sometimes want you to do things as their lawyer that are not that aren't following the rules. I've been asked many times during my career well, can't we say that this transaction happened last year rather than this year? And the answer is no. I'm not going to do that. This information on the tax return is not accurate, but you should sign it anyway as a preparer. No, I'm not going to do that. So that you're asked that many times, and it might mean you lose a client, but you won't lose your reputation.
Just to follow up, how much say do you have with that? I mean, you just gave examples of
100%. Meaning, if you're asked to do something you know is breaking the rules or against the law, it's your choice whether to say yes or no. I mean, it's clear as that. I mean, I'm not saying there won't be consequences, perhaps professional consequences, but you have total control over that.
A firm like McDermott, Will, and Emery doesn't sustain its reputation by cutting corners.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the lawyers in the firm all are bound by their professional responsibility obligations. If you're, as part of your bar license, you're subject to that. The firm itself can have, I mean, there are pretty serious repercussions when lawyers act unethically. And I think, most firms and most big firm lawyers just, are not going to take that chance to just make one or two clients happy.
And by the way, the end story of what happened, true story, when I've been asked by a client to backdate documents, which you've all heard of, backdating documents, was eventually we fired the client. And so it gives you it should give you an idea that big law isn't all bad, that your partners will stand by you and say, we don't want this type of client. Because one, it's wrong, and two, that kind of client's going to bring the whole ship down.
That's right. So a question in the back. Yes.
I think one of the panel members wanted to.
Speak up a little, please.
I had a question, and it's not how I got to this. I'm a fourth year, and I'm not planning on going to graduate school right away. Is there anything that you can say between the interim of taking a year off and applying and going to graduate school that I should do, or entry-level jobs or internships or places to go with an interest in law?
This is the most commonly asked question that I hear, and I think that Debbie hears on an annual basis, and that is, should I go straight to graduate school, as you put it, law school? Should I take a year off, 2 years off? Should I work as a paralegal? What should I do? And I'd be interested to hear the views of the panelists.
I mean, I went straight through. Neil and I both did. We're a class of 93 from UC and 96 from law school. I mean, I kind of wish I had taken some time off. The U of C is a very intense place to go to school. And I mean, in some ways, law school, I found it easier than the U of C. Which, I mean, I didn't really say that at the time, because I'm sure people would have thought it was so obnoxious.
She went to Stanford.
I mean, it just, particularly as a humanities major, I mean, we would have like 50 pages of reading in a law school class. It's like, okay, we had 400, so, but at the same time, like, it is tough. Like, I felt kind of burned out on school, and I was a little envious of people who were sort of coming back to school. Because once you've had a full-time job, to be able to go back to school, I mean, there's some really great things about student life. And I think that they kind of got to enjoy that part of it. And for me, it just seemed like, oh God, like yet another set of exams, yet another set of outlines to write. And I would say, like, I personally don't think it matters when I do interviewing for DOJ. Like, if people took time off and they were ski instructors in Vail versus like they interned at Amnesty International or something. I mean, I personally think it would be nice for you to have a job that doesn't have anything to do with law, that's kind of giving you just sort of a taste of life as a working adult, and that isn't necessarily going to be something on your resume, because you'll have done well here, you'll do well in law school, and that's really what people are going to look at.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I took a year off and clerked at a law firm, and it was an okay experience. It wasn't anything exceptional, but I think the important thing is, for the advice I would give is to, if you're going to take time off, do it not for the appearance, similar to what we were saying before about not taking one job for another. If you're going to take time off, do it because it's something you're passionate about, that you feel really strongly about, that you're going to get a lot from the experience.
I recommend taking time off for the same reason that Diane identified, and that is the intensity of the undergraduate curriculum here. You don't want to go to law school burned out. It is a total intellectual immersion experience. And if you do work for a year or two, don't be a paralegal. You're going to do nothing but photocopying and making binders. And there's nothing exciting about that. Do something interesting. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So for those of you who now work in the public sector, who have worked in the private sector, what do you leave?
I wanted more responsibility. Like Melanie said, I mean, I did a lot of document review, I worked in a lot of white collar investigations, which when I was looking at firms sounded, oh, it's so cool, and the company's investigating itself. But when you're the junior associate, you sit in the witness meetings, you write up the memo, you get the documents. I mean, it's not that it's not uninteresting, but you're not the one going to meet with the U.S. Attorney's Office to say, hey, our guy's not so bad, you shouldn't charge him. You're not the one going to court doing oral arguments, even if you wrote the briefs. You go to court with all the binders, with all the cases that are cited in the brief, so you can prep the partner, so he can do the argument on the briefs that you wrote. So, I mean, in the government, you write the briefs, you do the argument, you know, you do the jury trial. I mean, I really wanted the experience. I was tired of sort of like doing all this junior work and prepping people on work that was mine. And, you know, it's a while in a law firm before you get to do that, before you get to be the one in court, kind of in on the action, taking being the lead attorney on something. And so for me, I just knew that. I knew I didn't really want to stay and make partner, and I sort of selfishly was like, you know, I want this experience. I want to be the one doing it. So that's why I left.
Yes, sir.
This is sort of a follow-up to that question. Can you speak to the ease of the transition between private practice and going to work for the government?
I mean, it was kind of tough. I mean, the government, I think the biggest difference, aside from the resources, you know, like I had a fabulous secretary, I had great paralegals, you know, I like had this program where I could like write, like I would like 2 boxes of pens and, you know, a thing of Redweld, and that's not how it is in the government. And I think the bureaucracy, that was, again, like the government is very much like sometimes you're dealing with people who are like, that's not my job, that's so-and-so's job down the hall, and she doesn't work here past 2 o'clock on Wednesdays, so we're not gonna be able to talk to her, you know, so that part of it, I found that transition was a little bit difficult, but for me, because I really wanted the experience, I was so, you know, I think for new attorneys right out of law school or a clerkship, it's a little intimidating to get handed a complaint, like, oh, hey, here's the complaint, you have an answer due in 60 days, figure out. But
resources and training are the big difference between the public and private sector.
I think that's tougher for people who come in through the honors program.
I think actually the biggest difference you'll have is your sudden pay cut. Will be quite an adjustment. I mean, you'll make less than half, significantly less than half probably of what you'll make as a first-year associate, right, when you go to the government. And so you just have to be prepared for that. And so a lot of people do go to private sector because of the loans and the amount of, but you also get used to living a certain kind of lifestyle that you'll give up when you work for the government. On the other hand, you'll also pretty quickly find that you're doing so much more interesting work with so much more responsibility than you were before, and I think that also makes up for a lot. So it has its ups and downs.
Yes, ma'am.
So something that's been addressed earlier was that University of Chicago teaches us not facts and how to think, and we're quirky, and you made the comment that law school in some respects is easier than University of Chicago. And I'm just wondering, is there actually a truth to that? University of Chicago teaches you how to think differently. Is there anything in your fields where you saw a situation and you feel like you addressed it differently maybe because you went to U of C? You know, I just know people who think that I think differently.
I would, well, a couple points. I mean, I think my partners, my colleagues who have liberal educations tend, I think, to be better lawyers, and they think differently than people who have a different type of background or educational background. And the reason is, I mean, I think fundamentally, my colleagues who, and myself included, I think have a better understanding of what motivates people, which means what motivates clients. And I disagree with the notion that the work in the public sector is necessarily more interesting. I agree that it takes a longer period of time to get the interesting work in the private sector than it does in the public sector. But the problems that my clients have on a day-to-day basis are out of Dickens. I mean, there's family turmoil, you know, loss of a fortune, and all of that is based on, in some measure, on personal dynamics and how people are as human beings. So I think the kind of educational background we have here at Chicago is helpful in that regard.
Let me chip in on that. The distinctive feature of the undergraduate education at the University of Chicago is immediate engagement with original text. It's not memorization, it's not recitation, it's engaging original text and building arguments based on analysis of those texts. That doesn't happen in a lot of places. Doesn't happen in a lot of places because of numbers, because of conventional wisdoms, and the like. But you know when you make an argument in a classroom, at least I hope it still works this way in other classrooms than mine, you stake out a position, you better be able to substantiate it in a logical fashion and not simply on the grounds of friendship, camaraderie, or political sympathy. And that makes a real difference. That's a habit of mine. And I've had a number of judges say to me that they're impressed not only with our law students, but with our undergraduates for that reason. There's another, yes, sir, you had a question.
I definitely would like to handle an appeal, which is tough at Justice because we have a separate section that does appeals, and they are not anxious to give them to the attorney. But for example, the jury trial, if that gets appealed, they are not going to want to read the 10 pages of trial testimony. So I think I might have a shot at that one. So that's definitely a goal of mine. I definitely had a goal to do a jury trial, so I was glad that I was able to have that. And I would like to do another one now, although maybe in, like when my kids are a little older, I think, so, because it was pretty intense. But yeah, I definitely still have professional goals in terms of, you know, the kind of task that you do as a lawyer. The Supreme Court, that would be great too, but I don't think, unless I get a job in the SG's office, which I don't think is going to happen, but yeah.
My goal, I just figured out this year, and it has nothing to do with my practice, and I have finally figured out the book I want to write. And now I just have to figure out when I'm going to do it.
How about you, Melanie?
Well, on a daily basis, there's a lot of things that I'd like to do. I'd like to help reformulate the Federal Election Commission, which is an entire disaster and needs to go. I'd like to help force John Ensign from office. There are, you know, I'd like to see the House and Senate take ethics seriously and not just use it as a campaign promise. But then I also want to figure out what I want to do next, because I've been doing this for 7 years, and I also don't believe that anybody should have any job in perpetuity, and I want to figure out what would be the next fun, exciting thing to do.
Tell us what you really think.
I hope that's not an argument against tenure. Another question? Yes.
I know there's times in your career where you're obviously doing more busy work, so you have to work, you know, more hours or in general. How did you see those kind of timelines, both of them, come together? Was it, you know, what kind of difficulties did you have to like go through?
I mean, I definitely thought about that when I was at the firm. Like, I did not have kids then, and I looked at some of my colleagues in the law firm who did. I mean, it's definitely a struggle. I will say some of the changes in technology, which you guys are all have been your whole lives, but you know, email and Blackberries and remote access, I mean, that makes a big difference. So like, I still leave work at 4:30, but definitely when I was in like prepping for trial, I would put the kids to bed and then I'd be like logging on from home from like 8 to midnight or something. So for me, the hours are tough, but in litigation, it's very event driven. You have a brief due, you have a trial, and you can kind of get through it and then things sort of calm down a little bit. So, but you know, it helps if you're, you know, married to someone, your partner is someone who also is there too. I mean, my husband and I definitely, there's constant like, well, I have to go on this business trip. Okay, you have to get the kids. I have to drop the kids off because I have to be at work late for a meeting. I mean, so on a day-to-day basis, we're definitely doing that. But I mean, that was one of the reasons when I went to the government, also in the back of my mind, that you know, you have a lot more control over your schedule, and people don't expect you to just kind of be there to be there. There's like not a lot of face time, which is very nice.
It's one of the many reasons that I went into education, have more control over hours, because I knew I wanted to have children, and I knew I wanted to support a working partner, and she wanted to have children, and she had been first in public service, then in private practice, and that was very difficult when we had a young child. Then she moved into the academy. And it was a lot easier, but it still stretches you. You had a question in the second row.
Me?
Yeah.
That was my question.
Oh, okay, fine. Ben?
Over the past 18 months or so, what have been the effects that you've seen that the financial crisis has had on your work as a lawyer, particularly on, I guess, young lawyers that are just coming out of law school? Like, do you find that it's, there's changes that are happening to like their experience, because your experience just generally, if you guys can talk about the financial crisis and the effect that it's had on.
I mean, real, yeah.
Well, I will say that the financial crisis has had a profound effect on the practice of law. Now, I'm fortunate because my practice is actually a beneficiary of that, and so we are very, very busy. But I know that our firm and my friends at other firms tell me it's the same story with them, that there are severe cutbacks in hiring. As you may, if you read the blogs for law students above the law and so forth, you realize that many of the incoming law classes have been deferred, some indefinitely, and it is generally acknowledged to be the most difficult time in the law market, probably since the Depression. And maybe even worse, because during the Depression, there wasn't the concept of big law, mega law firms. And my personal view is that the law firm industry, the law firm model, the mega firm, if you will, is going to change significantly over the next decade in ways we can't even imagine. But it's the type of practice that I started in, that Diane started in, I think is essentially over. There's going to be, there's extreme pushback on rates, lawyer rates, which means that incoming law students aren't going to be paid as much. To Melanie's point, they're ticked off about that because some of them are going to get pay cuts. And if you're used to living a certain way, having a 10–15% cut in salary is significant. And it's just an uncertain time in the law field. And so that's why I started out by saying, you've got to think really long and hard if you want to get into this. And if you do, I think you can find a fulfilling, interesting career, but it's a challenge.
But the idea of walking out the door, getting paid $160,000 a year with automatic annual substantial increases in the form of salary or bonus is over.
I agree. I agree.
Lawyers are lousy businessmen. The big firm model doesn't work.
And the big firm model was based essentially on increasing rates every year, which is, if you think about it, no business in America can sustain that. It means you're increasing your price every year by significant amounts. Eventually, your customers are going to say no.
You got a question?
How would you respond to critics who say that we have no really litigious society and we don't need any more lawyers? I guess and hopefully you can accept it.
Well, I'm a defense lawyer, so I would say you're right. I mean, it's true. I mean, people in the U.S. there is a lot of litigation, and often, I mean, I see it not even so much at work, but like even in my neighborhood, my homeowners association, there's like threats about someone has a fence. I mean, people are very quick to resort to that. I mean, I'm not sure it's going anywhere, unfortunately. So, I mean, it would be nice if, I think people maybe took steps back before they ended up in court right away, but sometimes that is the only way to resolve the dispute, in a civilized sort of in a process. So.
But I don't think being a lawyer necessarily means you're going to be involved in litigation. There are so many things you can do with law. You can be involved in policy. I worked in both the House and the Senate and worked on criminal justice policy. And I mean, there are lawyers throughout working on every element of policy you can possibly imagine. There are all sorts of administrative law things you can do. There's compliance work. There's helping to avoid lawsuits. I mean, there's an awful lot that lawyers do and are qualified to do and have that intellectual capacity and analytical ability to do. It is not about suing somebody for something stupid.
Being a lawyer isn't necessarily about doing the good. I mean, obviously, you have to follow ethical standards, but in state government, you're following the law, and sometimes the law is good, and sometimes the law is bad. And the law says that this is the procedure for following things and that a person has the right to litigate that process. You're carrying out the will of the legislature, and it's really for higher powers other than the people carrying out the law sometimes to decide.
You have to look at a larger picture too. I mean, that's since the Civil War. You know, the American polity has thought that social policy and social justice can be improved or enhanced by law, by litigation, that people can be controlled, that they can be made better or be penalized for not being good. First 10 amendments to the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, you know, all contemplate legal enforcement of social norms. So it's deeply ingrained in American political culture. And trying to get it out ain't easy. Yes? Speak up, please.
If you were born a blog and you have bilingual talent, how do you present those assets to law schools in the application process to make yourself competitive? And also, in the future, how can you forge partnerships in those contexts?
I think Debbie is the one to answer that question, and it's probably individual specific. I'm not sure you can give a generic answer to that. So the answer to your question begins with making an appointment to see Debbie. Sir.
I'm just wondering, I don't know if everybody else can say both, but I don't really know where I stack up in terms of like which law school I would be able to get into.
Yeah.
And whether or not I would be interested in going to law school, even if I don't get into like one of the top 12, or you know whether I'm in like tier 2 or tier 3. How do your like career prospects change if you're going to Ohio State Law School or something as opposed to Harvard or Yale?
I mean, I have to say, just doing the DOJ honors hiring for this past year, I mean, we interviewed 100 people and we made offers to 14, and I think all of them are law clerks to federal judges, either trial court or appellate. I mean, and this is DOJ, it's very selective, but I would say, you know, there's probably 2 who did not go to a top 15 law school. And typically when we hire people who went to Ohio State, they're like #1 in their class or top 5%. You know, but a lot of the time, especially for litigation, it's also funneled through the federal judges, the judicial hiring. Because if you want to hire a law clerk as, you know, to be an incoming trial attorney, then they've already sort of been funneled to some extent by who the judges hire. So it is fairly, I mean, I think law school sort of rankings are definitely a big factor.
Also depends on what your aspirations are. If you want to, you know, get into the DOJ honors program, that's one thing. If you want to be an assistant state's attorney in Hinds County, Mississippi, that's a different career path. So you really, and again, we talked to Debbie, law schools are merciless when it comes to admission. They care about 2 things. They care about your grade point average, and they care about your LSAT score. Full stop. Because of U.S. News and World Report. I mean, it has utterly corrupted the admission pattern in American legal education. But that means that it's pretty easy to predict the competitive bands that you fall into when you have that data in hand. So Debbie can give you painfully accurate advice.
The one thing I'll say about that is that really affects also hiring in big cities, but just like Professor Hutchinson said, if you want to go to a smaller town in America, that's a totally different market, and there, you know, you're going to have a big problem in Washington, Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Once you're outside those markets, your options, even if you've gone to a lower tier law school, are going to be much greater. But again, I still think that you'll need to do well in your class.
Yes.
As kind of a follow-up to that, would you say that's also true in the private sector, or is that just public?
No, I'd say it's true in the private sector. I'd say that, you know, this is the same advice I gave my brother-in-law. That is, he was thinking about going to law school, and he asked, well, what if I don't get into a top 10 law school? And I said, well, I think the answer is easy. Your options become more limited. Meaning, if you get into a, probably more accurately, a top 7 law school now, top 5 to 7 law school, and you do pretty well, meaning the top quarter of your class, you'll have a good chance of finding a job at a good law firm that pays well, that'll help you pay your loans. If you're in a top 25 law school and you're in the bottom half of your class, it's going to be more difficult to find a job, and you may not find a job in this market. And so I think a lot of people, when they think about going to law school and they go through the application process and they find that they're not in the school that they want to be in or the band of school, then it's a good time to rethink your plan.
Debbie, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think this advice is particularly pointed right now with the economy in that there's more pressure to go to a top school, but I think it's also important to remember that after you get past those top schools, a lot of the schools do place well regionally, and that our students have gone on to very successful careers even when they haven't gone to the top 10 schools if they do well at the schools they go to. That's tempered by the current economy, but in terms of the long haul, it's important to know that.
Yes, sir.
I had a question on whether or not joint degree programs such as JD is advantageous.
I don't know that much about that. All the JD MBAs I knew at Stanford ended up on the business side. It did seem that way. Like, I actually wasn't really sure why they got the JD, because most of them ended up in investment banks or in venture capital funds. They seem to be kind of accessing much more their MBA degree.
Each year, University of Chicago graduates 208 JDs, and in that class each year, there are usually a couple JD MBAs. Past experience, the past 3 or 4 years, those with MBAs have been tending much more toward business, toward investment banking, or something along those lines. So maybe there's some utility to it. I think generally joint degrees such as JD, MPPs or something like that are a waste of time and money. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what kind of classes you took as an undergrad that you think help you most in law school or in your careers now, like humanities classes, science classes.
Which classes? I mean, I would say Hutch's classes. I mean, because he does the calling, and like I definitely had professors like that at Stanford. And I mean, for people who majored in like econ or business or marketing, I mean, that was a huge change from the kinds of like kind of big lecture classes. So I would say, and really just any of the classes at Chicago where you're really expected to articulate a point of view and say why it, what is your basis for saying that. I mean, it's surprising in law school how many people are not really accustomed to making arguments like that. Like, even if you don't end up in litigation, you still take classes like in law school that's pretty set, common law, civil procedure, federal jurisdiction, and in those types of classes, that's the sort of approach the professors want you to take, and a lot of people just can't, they sort of freeze when they have to make an argument.
I guess I would recommend taking classes outside your comfort zone, that if it's something you're not comfortable with, that you don't think you know much about it, that you're probably going to learn a lot from it because it's something you're not, that it's outside what you already know. So if you challenge yourself, it's probably going to help you in the long run to thinking.
Neil?
I was a fundamentals major, and so to Professor Hutchinson's point, any of these close reading classes I think are very helpful. And then to me, it didn't really matter what the subject is. It teaches you this engagement with the text that you'll find not many of your classmates in law school will have.
Molly?
I was an English major, and I think basically the capacity to read an awful lot of material in a shorter period of time was helpful.
Very good. We should probably do a couple more questions if we're going to stay on time, as we were insisted upon doing. Yes?
Sort of as a follow-up to that, so if you're not majoring in fields like poli-sci or philosophy or fundamentals or something, and say biology, do you feel, I don't know okay, so none of you majored in that, but if you had any colleagues that did, do you feel like they were at a disadvantage or an advantage while in law school because of that?
Well, I would say a few of the colleagues I respect the most for their intellect, their creativity, were math majors, actually. And so I don't think I don't think it matters terribly much what you major in, as long as you are thoughtful and you do well and take the coursework seriously.
Some of the most impressive law students I've had have been physics or biology majors in college. You are not at a disability. Other questions? Sir.
My question is for Melanie. You spoke earlier about your dilemma of whether or not to go to grad school for English or to pursue a JD. And I'm in the process of declaring a major now, and I keep going back and forth between different majors, and the major I keep coming back to is English. But the reason I keep kind of swaying away from that is I've received a lot of what I perceive to be negative feedback for my choice to pursue an English major. A lot of people will tell me, you'll never be able to get a job, or you want to be a screenwriter, or just various things like that. And I feel like they want to kind of place you in a box. So I was just wondering if you received any of those type of things, like, or heard any things that were similar to that while you were in college, and why?
Yeah, from my dad, who never really thought being an English major was such a great thing. So yeah, but you know what? I love being an English major. It was really great, and you're not going to have that opportunity again. I mean, you should really take the opportunity in college to explore what you love, because then once you're going to graduate school, you're really looking much more specifically at a profession. So I would take this opportunity to take all the great classes that are offered at U of C in so many different things, because later you're going to wish you could have had those chances, and you're going to feel like you missed. I wish I'd taken philosophy courses. I don't know that would have helped me specifically more, but I still feel like I had a huge benefit from being forced to take the Common Core and knowing something about so many different topics. I am terrible at math and science, and I would never have taken those classes if I hadn't been here, but I now can read the paper and understand when there's some astrophysics discovery, and it means a little more to me than it would have, and I'd never taken those courses. So my advice is to take these classes and enjoy it, and worry about the rest of it at professional school.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that you hear from younger people about your careers in law school and the legal profession?
That it's going to be glamorous like it is on television. And it's not. And if you watch CSI, I was a criminal prosecutor, there is nothing remotely true on any of those shows. It is never the way, fingerprints are not like that. You don't just run it through a database and suddenly you have a match where the computer screen says bing, 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 match. Doesn't happen. And as, by the way, if you do go into criminal law, CSI has been a huge problem for prosecutors, because now juries seem to expect that you are going to have the kind of evidence that you see on CSI, and it doesn't exist.
It was the same problem in the 50s and 60s with Perry Mason. Yeah. Suddenly, if you didn't have fingerprints, it was all over.
So it's a lot of hard work, and things take months. Even in criminal law, things take a lot of hard work and detail-oriented time, and it's not quite as cool as it always seems on television.
I think the notion that if you're going to pursue some sort of profession and pursue excellence while doing that, that somehow your personal time won't be compromised. I mean, lawyers work hard, successful people work very hard, and that's going to have an impact on the amount of time you could spend, playing golf or playing tennis or doing the things that you find great enjoyment in. And I think that's, I don't think anyone's figured a way around that yet, even with the great technology that we have now to help make work easier. There's still a lot of it.
You have to figure out a way of making sure that your vocation doesn't become your life. It's one thing to be dedicated to what you're doing. It's another thing to allow it to consume you. One or two more questions, and we'll have to break up. Sir?
For you, Professor, is there any rationale behind purely number-based law school admission? Because it seems so different from these undergraduate.
American law schools seem to think that there is a high correlation between the far right tail and the far left tail on standardized tests. In other words, that people who score in the 170 range and up time and again do better in law school than those who score in the 160 to 170 range. And there have been studies that some law schools have done that reached that conclusion. In other words, that the predictors are more valid over time for that applicant pool than the SATs are for people who are 4, 5, and 6 years younger. And once it becomes an arms race amongst the top 5 law schools, then everybody plays the same way. I'm not defending it, but I'm saying that's why it's happened. One more question. Sir, you haven't had a chance yet.
Oh, free time? I mean, again, I'm in litigation like Melanie, so it is primarily driven by like what is happening in your case. So like when I had my trial, I mean, I would get to work at like 6 in the morning and I would get home at 8:30 at night, you know, but the trial was like 8 days and probably the couple weeks before the trial. I mean, again, I was doing it at home, but it would be like, you know, at work till 4:30 and then working from like 8 till 1 in the morning. But on a typical like week, if nothing's pressing, you know, I'm home by 5:30. You know, generally, I will say, unless you're in trial or writing a huge brief or something, I don't work weekends. That's a big difference from being at a law firm. I regularly worked weekends. So, I mean, I would say, you know, you have free time during the week, but I have little kids, so they're around. But the weekends are pretty much free, which is great.
My life is pretty much scandal driven. So if there's a big Washington scandal, I'm working all the time. But otherwise, again, I'll echo what Diane says. I work generally from about 8 to 6. But you know, the BlackBerry and the technology is good and bad, especially because we deal a lot with media things. I am sort of always on the clock, and that includes weekends. But I'm not usually. It's very rare for me to be in the office weekends unless we have a big case. And I find that is a big difference, especially when I interview and I talk to private lawyers who are looking to leave. And part of the reason they're leaving is there's a big quality of life issue with the billable hour thing. They are working very late at night, and that can include, I've had a friend who's a partner at a firm who's, you know, still there till 9 o'clock at night most nights. And there's definitely a lot of weekends. So, although that too tends to be a little more litigation focused, and I'll be interested to hear Neil's view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have as much free time as I want, but I agree with Professor Hutchinson that you need to, and it's easier when you're more senior, but you need to take the time. So I get in the office probably about 7:30 and I leave about 7. And then, unless I'm traveling, my wife's also a lawyer, we have dinner together, and maybe I'll do a little bit of work late in the evening, emails and so forth. I used to go into the office every weekend, sometimes both days. I haven't been in the office in the weekend in a long, long time, but I'll work from home. I'll do some work from home, and I have, I think not enough free time, but I have a fair amount of free time. And I agree that some lawyers are there, you know, 15 hours a day all the time, but you know I think that actually is going to eventually have a negative impact on their ability to service their clients. You know, you don't make great decisions when you're sleep deprived.
Last question in the back row.
So with everything said, I know you guys are lawyers. Would you say it's worth it? Is it worth it?
I mean, yeah, I love being a lawyer. I love the issues I get to work on. I love the challenges. I really like my colleagues. And I mean, I think I love crafting arguments and trying to present them in ways that are persuasive. And I mean, I think I am really glad I went to law school, and I really love being a lawyer. But I will say not a lot of lawyers say that. It's true.
I love being a lawyer too. I think it has given me the opportunity to do so many widely different things in my career, from working in the House and Senate to working at the U.S. Attorney's Office to being at a nonprofit. And I think being a lawyer and having that analytical background has been terrific. And the other thing I really want to say here is, you know, don't let us discourage you. If you think you really want to be a lawyer, even if you don't get into a top law school and it's still what you really want to do, that does not mean you can't be a success. You can be. You know, there are certain things you're not going to get into the honors program at Justice. Okay, but that doesn't mean you can't be incredibly important and significant in some way in doing something you really care about.
No,
Here.
I mean, I agree. It's worth it. It's been worth it for me. I mean, maybe that's the wrong question. The question is worth it for you. I can't answer that.
And I love my job. It's a great job, but there are many law jobs that I would hate. So being a lawyer isn't one niche. It's different for everybody.
We could bring in the counter panel, I suppose. People were utterly miserable, decided at age 45 that they'd wasted their professional lives looking for something else to do, and all that sort of thing. I'm not sure that would be terribly helpful advice as a general matter. Thank you for coming today. Good luck.